but I don't think you own it until you feel it.
Mm.
It penetrates your heart and then your mind. One of the great force multipliers in business to make people feel a part of it is to ask two questions. How do you feel about that? What do you think? That empowers a person to be themselves. They're not just doing a job. It means more than that. But you have to make your group feel that way.
Welcome to the Corporate Competitor Podcast. This show is all about discovering how the lessons from sports shape today's business leaders. And with March Madness in full swing, we couldn't think of a better time to bring back one of my all-time favorite conversations from 2023. The legendary Coach K. Mike Krzyzewski isn't just the winningest coach in NCAA history, he's a five-time national champion, a Naismith Hall of Famer, and the leader who helped Team USA bring home multiple gold medals. But what makes Coach K truly special is how he built a culture of excellence that extended far beyond the court. In this Rewind episode, you'll hear how he connected his players to a mission bigger than themselves, why trust is the foundation of championship teams, and how these same leadership principles can help you elevate your business and career. So whether you're leading a team, growing a business, or just looking for a little March Madness inspiration. And before we start, I want to hear from you. What's the best leadership lesson you've ever learned from a coach, mentor, or boss? Drop your answer in the YouTube comments. Coach, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's good to see you. Over the years, we've become good friends, and you've even come to our fantasy camp and hit a basket or two. I'm not sure three, but
they call them Jaeger bombs for a reason, Coach.
Yeah. Bombs sometimes hit and bombs sometimes miss. So I'll try to look at get more depth into how that Jaeger bombs came about.
Well, then I would love, I got to ask, because you've already referenced, I love coming to your event, love being part, your charity for the Emily K Foundation, your mom's name, the education charity is so passionate, such an important part of who you are and what you do. But you do this event, you call it the K Academy, you call it a fantasy camp. I don't think there's any fantasy involved. Like when I hit a shot, it's real. But it's a bunch of us old folks that want to come play at Cameron Indoor. You've had this guy, number 76 up there, coming to your event for a number of years. 78? My gosh, I gave myself the wrong jersey number. You got to give me a scouting report on that guy, Jaeger.
Well, you depends on what shape you came in. And the better the shape, the better the player. I mean, but our camp is 5 days long, and it's the best one in the country. And we had our 20th anniversary this past, just right after Memorial Day, and 115, mostly men, a few women, and now we have some golf too. And we bring back 30 to 40 of our former players, and it's a great networking camp. And also it's a networking camp for the campers too, for the players, because you shed all your titles before you go on the court. And so you get to make friends, not because of being a lawyer, a doctor, a writer, or whatever. You become friends because of who you are. And that's what athletics does. It makes it genuine and real.
Are you a good teammate? Do you hit the open guy? Or are you taking a bad shot when you shouldn't be?
Do you accept constructive criticism?
Now I'm going to tell you that hurts right there. I'm wondering if they
see, don't be so sensitive. A lot of guys who are at the camp, they're always giving the orders, and all of a sudden in a huddle, someone tells you to keep your mouth shut, or you do this or you do that, and you start having empathy for the people you have the honor to lead in your normal life.
I love it. I want to get to leadership questions because you're the model for in so many ways. You're the master class. Literally, I watched it again yesterday. You grew up in a Polish community, inner
Right.
city Chicago, youngest large extended family, and even among your friend group, you were recognized early as a leader. Where did that early relationship with leadership come from?
Yeah, it's something that just happened naturally. And, when I grew up, it's a long time ago. I'm 76 years old, but you had different communities in the inner city of Chicago. You had your Italian, Polish, Puerto Rican, African American, and basically, you didn't have parents run things for you. You went to a schoolyard, your buddies were there, and okay, what do we do? And I didn't want to stand around, so I usually tried to organize. We made up games. We played basket. We played every sport. We you know we we came up with new things, and we didn't have anybody to say, well, now you do this. Like I worry a little bit in how kids develop leadership now when they're minutely managed uh, at every turn. And for me, that was just a natural thing. And then when I went to high school, I was captain of my basketball team for a couple of years, and it led to me getting scholarship offers. And finally, I went to the United States Military Academy. It just happened to be the best leadership school in the world. So sports have given me that opportunity to lead, and then at an early age, then the need to do something together prompts you to improvise, to like, okay, we're not just going to stand here. We got 10 guys. We can play basketball 5-on-5. We got 11 guys. We can play baseball. And, once at the right side from second base on is out. So you play on part of, you have two guys, and you have put a square on a school wall, and all of a sudden you're with a rubber ball and bat, you have a game against the other guy, and you improvise. You're always thinking, and I've done that my whole life.
That's a great leadership trait, right? Is that ability to constantly say, here's the circumstances we have,
Right.
and what can we do with it?
There's no question about it. Like, hopefully it's not just impromptu, although the spontaneous part of leadership is exciting, but, the planned part of leadership can be even more exciting. Certainly it leads to the accomplishment of a goal, but even a planned set of circumstances and what you're trying to do during that time to show the agility. I think a really good leader shows agility and adaptability in being able to read situations and be able to change their plan and not be a slave to it. I coached for 47 years, West Point and Duke, 11 years also as the national coach for the U.S. And in each season, you probably have 100 practices. Every night, I drew up a practice plan to make sure we're time efficient, that we're getting, we're building things up the right way. And then I'd have a meeting the next morning with my staff to go over responsibilities. And at times we change part of this, like who is speaking here, you take this drill, I'll take this. And then when you're implementing, you're actually doing the practice, all of a sudden, boy, this isn't working, or, we're going to need more time. I might eliminate another thing, or just say, all right, that's not working right now. We're going to, we're going to go to something else. And, when you and I have talked over the years, we talk about momentum, momentum in a practice, like something is really going well, or something you had wanted a players or an assistant do, you say, I'm going to run with that. We have good momentum going there, and that produces a better practice. But that's being adaptable and agile. On the other hand, if things aren't going as well, to eliminate it, and so you don't produce a negative mojo,
Right.
and
going the other way.
Yeah, and that's those are the exciting things about leadership. Is it 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 leadership's the best profession in the world, and it transcends everything. Like in medicine and in education and family, or you name it. In business, if you don't have good leadership, that ship's not. I shouldn't say ship. I'm an Army guy. That organization or that team's not going to run as well.
One of the greatest exercises in agility I think I've ever seen from a head coach was, you had this perfect, 4-year model, right? Christian Laettner, Bobby Hurley, Grant Hill, these folks came and they developed and they got better. Your best players aren't there toward the end of your career, 4 years.
No,
and so
not even 2 years.
Not even 2 years, right?
Yeah.
So you had to look at your development of them differently.
Well, the very first thing is that a lot of people had the impression that we changed our recruiting style. That we did not. I mean, we look for those same 3 things, except that now with the NBA going younger and whatever, those kids had an opportunity after 1 year, if they were that good, that kids a decade before didn't have until they finished 4 years. So what we did was, in our recruiting process, we tried to identify even earlier who we would recruit. And instead of waiting, we had a good relationship with a kid who came in for 4 years, for decades. We didn't have to develop the depth of relationship that we needed to with the 1-year guy, because we had all this time to develop. So their last year in high school, we ended up spending more time, not reevaluating them, but talks, getting to know them, asking if they can come on unofficial visits, not just an official visit. And we brought them in earlier in the summer, the freshmen, so that we actually eventually called it a brotherhood program, where they would learn about our traditions, and that. And it was kind of force feeding, but we had to make up for the ground that we lost by not having them for a period of time. Also, when we had the older guys were the better players in the 4-year. With the one and dones, the guy who was one and done was more talented than the senior, or else the senior would have left when he was a junior.
Right.
So how do you teach your culture? You saw how our managers worked at the fantasy camp. They are, we have 12 to 15 managers, and they do everything. And they're 4-year men and women, and young men and women. And a lot of them, I'd hire all of them if I was in business. And they were treated at the same level a player was. However, they did, every job imaginable. Their motto.
A lot of dirty work.
Yeah, their motto was, the difficult is easy, the impossible takes a little longer. But what along with the Duke education, they learned to be on a team of managers. And you know what? They learned to work. They weren't, that no job was too small for them. And they set an environment for our players. And our players could never say, hey, go get this. They better know their names. They better say thanks. And a lot of, on trips and that, the managers and the players would sit with one another, and they became an integral part of things. So the managers were huge. And obviously our infrastructure of people, secretaries, trainer, nutritionists, we all had to speak the same voice and hold the players accountable for being good people and our standards in every location, not just when they were with me. So I had to rely even more on my infrastructure managers and then start the process earlier. And it worked.
Before we continue, I want to remind you that if one of your 2025 goals is writing a book, but you don't know where to start, I'm here to help. In my new role as publisher at Forbes Books, I'm working alongside a world-class team to guide aspiring authors like you through the process of getting published. Whether it's a story, a big idea, or a project close to your heart, now's the time to make it happen. Just visit forbesbooks.com/Don to get started. You once referred in a conversation I know we had on this a few years ago, you refer to those managers as culture carriers. I love that phrase, right? I love that idea. How could we as business leaders go out and identify and actually build out a network of culture carriers like that?
I think it has to start out with one of the values of our program, and that's respect. And respect means that everybody's important. Everybody in your organization is important. And there'll be people that will move quicker to another location or another job. There are some that will want to be there for a long period of time in certain positions. Do not minimize those positions or take those positions for granted. Life is enjoyed in a number of different ways. There's not one way of enjoying life. And if enjoying life means that you love being with the company that you own, that you're a part of, that you get fulfillment and you are shown where you can improve, you might stay there for a long period of time. And those people become those culture carriers for your group.
Yeah. You referenced USA Basketball, and maybe one of the most amazing things I've ever seen was how you created for that team what you called feel it moments, right? Moments where they felt that I am USA Basketball, right? Tell me about that, and maybe explain a little of what your thought process was in creating these kinds of moments and the leadership imperative you believe exists there.
Well, I think it's important that we listen, so we hear, and to see, you see things, but I don't think you own it until you feel it. It penetrates your heart and then your mind, and so with every team I've had, you try to create some moments like that. With the U.S. team, a lot of it had to do with the military. We wanted them to learn about selfless service, so we had wounded warriors come in and speak to them. That's the very first group that we ever had, and all our guys were crying. So did they feel it? And really, the first night with our first team, I told them after we have a standards meeting about how we're going to create common ground and live together. And I said, when you go back up to your suites, I want you to be 16 for 1 minute. I know you're zillionaires and studs, and just be 16 and look on your beds. And what we did was we laid out their Olympic uniforms. So later that night, I'm in the casino. We're in Vegas, and we're at the Wynn in Las Vegas, and I'm playing some video poker, and I got a tap on my back, and it's Kobe Bryant. And I miss him terribly, and what a exceptional human being, not just basketball player he was. And I said, "What's up?" He said, Coach, I did what you asked me to do." And I said, "What happened?" He said, "I cried." And so are there moments where you, in your group, do you accentuate a value, a feeling? Is there music? Is there a video? Is there a person that comes to talk, not necessarily to give a 60-minute lecture, but maybe a minute? Or is there, let's look at something somebody said. Let's share this quote. What does it mean to you? How do you, one of the great force multipliers in business to make people feel a part of it is to ask the question, two questions. How do you feel about that? What do you mean? No, I want to know how you feel. You really want to know what's inside of me? Yeah, you're that important. Or what do you think? You want to know what I think? You're not just going to tell me what I'm supposed to think? No, I want to know how you feel and what you're thinking about. That empowers a person to be themselves. They're not just doing a job. It means more than that. But you have to make your group feel that way. A leader doesn't have to come up with every idea. A leader doesn't have to be the smartest person in the room. A leader should get a lot of smart people together and listen. And listen. And to players also, because there's a reason that they're good. You wouldn't have recruited them, or they wouldn't be on the U.S. team unless they're good. Now, they probably have a lot of things that you don't know about. How do you get to know more about them and then incorporate it into that group? And Don, it's important to remember that although we're the Duke basketball team for 42 years or the U.S. team for 11, each team is different. Mm-hmm. Even if you had almost all the players back in the old days for the next year, they're different because they've spent a year, they've accomplished, they're old. People keep changing. That's good.
Right.
Make sure that you give them room to grow, but also that you find out how they've changed, what their goals are, get to know them. That leadership is a people understanding business. It's not a flow chart, that's or organizational chart, I should say. That's my problem with bureaucracy. It's committee, organizational charts, and I guess you need some of that. There's no question. You don't need all of it.
Right.
And I love to run motion offense that you make in reads. I love to form teams, and you do it over and over again. And it's not an exact science. Like there are really a lot of great books on leadership. Some of them have different titles, even though they're good books. The 7 Steps or the 21 Things, that's cool. There are a lot of great ideas in there, but there's no recipe for leadership.
Mm.
Like I did those 12 things. I don't have a team yet. And I said, well, there's probably 13, 14, and 15 that you should do too.
Need to get to
Or
that next.
maybe you should have eliminated 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah.
And, in other words, it's not an exact science, and you don't have to be perfect on it with it, but you know what? You have to be honest and truthful. And in leadership, when you are those things, that there's a word that we use, vulnerability. Like, be accountable, hold yourself accountable. I didn't judge that the right way. I should have listened to a suggestion I had, or on the other hand, I listened to a suggestion and I did that. I didn't do it. I did it because of the suggestion. Vulnerability is not just when you do something wrong. It's showing when you've done something right, but you give credit to other people. And it's called being inclusive. And being inclusive is the way to go, because that if you're inclusive, that means you own it. And if everyone owns it, they'll fight for it. And it's not rental property.
In prep to do this interview, I read tons of articles and some great quotes that you had, but one of them really stood out to me was you said communication doesn't always occur naturally, even among a tight-knit group of individuals. Communication must be taught and practiced in order to bring everyone together as one. Love the quote, love the discussion, and I started thinking, how do you, as a leader, how do you teach communication, and how do you practice it? I mean, how do you inspire communication amongst a tight-knit group of people?
You have to be together. You have to. How are you going to talk to somebody if you're not together? And in person, not just on the phone, not just texting and whatever, because you don't feel one another. Like, part of communication is to not just listen to somebody or have a discussion, but feel what they're saying, how they are saying it. I could give you, like, I'll take this piece of paper and I'll read something from it and I'll send it to you. Will you read it in the same voice
as you wrote it? Correct.
As I wrote it. Probably not. Or maybe unless we communicated, here's what I was trying to say to when you read this, I get it. I get it. I never had a player meeting in my 6th floor office. I had a small office right in our locker room complex, and we shared like a little kitchen with the players and all that. And I'd work out down there, and I'd have impromptu. Someone's getting a drink from a refrigerator, and hey, Mark, come over here and sit down for a minute, and more impromptu stuff. And in a practice, especially as I got older, I was not capable of doing the drills or teaching them, but I'd go to different parts, and I'd always tell my assistants, if I step in to say something, don't be offended, and impromptu, or I take a kid off to the side, or after a practice, let's sit down here. And so they have to see how you communicate. That's the best way to teach communication.
And I love, though, that you were consistently positioning yourself. You were putting yourself in a place to be able to be an impromptu. You could have stayed in your 6th floor office and not come downstairs.
Or sent a memo, or an email, or a text,
or a
whatever
by blast.
And then
right,
it gets me when people say, "Yeah, well, I sent an email." The person who is conveying the message has the responsibility to make sure that message is accepted and understood. And don't blame the people you're sending the email to, or if you didn't phrase it the right way. It's like I do a lot of speaking. Who's my audience? What's the theme? What are you trying to get across?
Coach, you've had one complete season in retirement, right?
Right.
And you're getting ready to start a second. Many of us are afraid of what happens when you stop doing that thing that defines us, right? What advice would you give us in that area?
Well, I never looked like coaching was defining me. I was enjoying what I was doing, and I loved it. Uh, I've been a lifelong learner of teamwork and leadership, so I've continued to do that. I do have a lifetime contract at Duke to be an ambassador, so I have my office, which that's an advantage. A lot of people uh, don't move to something else because they don't have a home base.
Mm-hmm.
I have a home and I have a home office, but when I'm in Durham, I come to my office at Duke every day for a certain amount of time. But I speak a lot around the country for the Washington Speakers Bureau. I still have my radio show. I'm a professor at our Fuqua School of Business in the practice of leadership. We run a huge nonprofit for the Emily Krzyzewski Center. And a cool thing is I have 10 grandkids that all live within 10 minutes of us. Mm. So, wow, how good that is. And, but I have purpose every day and some level of relevance, not the media relevance or the TV relevance, or like I'm okay not having that. I had so much, I had more than I probably deserved, but I'm okay with not being in that limelight. So it's been terrific. I have not missed coaching. I've missed the one part of coaching, I guess, that is relationship building, because you're around, I'm 76 years old. I feel like I'm a lot younger because I've had to be younger.
With all those 20-year-olds, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I kept getting older, and some of them never got to be 20. They were only 18 or 19. I mean, we're friends. When you asked me to do this, I didn't accept because we're going to talk about, our hobbies or which may be cool, that for another podcast or another show. You had said, I want to talk about leadership. I want to talk about teamwork. So it's been exciting to do that, because even, some of our communication today and how you phrase something has made me say something maybe a little bit different than I normally say or express it. I make notes about that stuff. So this has been a good thing for me to do. So again, who are you? How are you? Are you someone who's curious? Are you someone who is a lifelong learner? Yeah. And I am. So it's been kind of refreshing, to be quite frank with you.
I love it. Coach, I've got time for one last question. The summer of 23 this year, I want to talk about your buddy, Jim Valvano, right? You were there at his side, maybe the greatest speech ever given, right? In my opinion. He gave us that inspiration, and it's been a passion for you to raise money, ridiculous amounts of money in his name. Many of our listeners are aware of his legacy, but can you give us just a little nugget of why we should all jump in and support the V Foundation and the work that you and the others there are doing?
Jim's vision to raise money for research. It's the only way to beat cancer is through research. Jimmy had the vision of that while he was dying. There was no cure. And so every penny that someone contributes does not. We're endowed. We raised enough money to endow, and then a couple years from now, we'll have to raise more to keep that endowment going. But what you when you donate to the V Foundation, you got a chance, man, to have an impact on beating cancer. And it's happening. We just got through with the big V Wine celebration that I host in Napa. And we have our scientific committee come out there, about 20 of the top oncologists in the United States. And they talk about all the amazing things that are going on. These docs, like if you were in a game right now, we feel like we got it. We haven't won it completely. That's good. And give us more money. Put more researchers on the court. And you know what? At the end of the day, there won't be any room for cancer.
Well, you're winning. I'm winning today because I got a chance to learn from you. And thank you so much, Coach, for being a corporate competitor with us today.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it, Don. And best of luck in what you're doing. This has been an exciting time for me, too.
All right. It is just plain not often that you get a chance to have an interview and get into that kind of depth with one of the greatest coaches in history, certainly the winningest coach in the history of college basketball. So I know I usually give you 3 of my great takeaways. Today, sorry, doubling up. You're getting 6 because there was so much good content here. So the first was when he had that great line. One of the great force multipliers in business are when you ask these 2 questions. How do you feel about that? And what do you think? Most employees are not used to hearing that question, those 2 questions. What do you think? How do you feel? And when they find out that you actually care enough to ask and listen to their answers, then you are changing the dynamic. It empowers your team, those who work with you, to become themselves. As he said, when you ask those questions, you might come up with great answers, because an idea, you don't have to, as a leader, be the one that comes up with all the ideas. And if you ask those 2 questions, you listen to the answers, you may, in fact, come up with fresh and new and creative and unique ideas and ways to address the challenges you have. Secondly, I love the discussion about the importance of respecting everyone in your organization, to treat everyone, from the manager, in his phrase, right? From the manager of his team, the managers of the team who are going to be there year in and year out, to that superstar who's going to be the number 1 pick in the NBA draft. Treat them all with respect. You want to make sure that builds the culture, and that everyone understands that everyone's important. Do not minimize others by the position they hold or even the time they choose to stay in that position. Some people want to stay in a position for a longer period of time. That does not in any way cast an aspersion on their gift to you and the team. The third was how he builds those feel it moments. I talk about that in a keynote speech that I deliver often, about how Coach taught me that lesson, creating those feel it moments. But his line, I don't think you own it until you feel it and it penetrates your heart. Boy, that what truth there is there. This idea that when we feel who we work for, when we feel who it is that we are in service of, we change the dynamic of the discretionary energy we bring to work, right? And I loved his line, you don't work for, you are. You don't work for USA Basketball, you are USA Basketball, right? Think about that. Think about the empowerment that comes with that. Then, number 4, he talked about the importance that the person sending the message is responsible for making sure it was heard and understood. Now, how often do we, or do leaders, to just throw it out there and assume if I threw it out there, it's on you now to get it? The truth is, you have not taught until you have, and you have not taught until you have been heard, right? Until they understand. And Coach Wooden used to talk about that all the time. It's up to the message giver to get the message across and make sure it's received. I can't assume that just because I said it, you understood it. And the power in that was really important. And then the next one that jumped out to me was the impromptu manner in which he stays engaged with his team, right? The ability to regularly come down from the sixth floor and work out in that down near the practice area, work out there so that the players would see him and he would end up in conversations that he wouldn't have if he could only summon them to the sixth floor. How do you do that? And what are you willing to do? And then lastly, the importance of building a great plan. Remember, he talked about the amount of effort he put into his practice plans, but then he had to be agile and be ready to adjust when the moment called for it. And so have a plan, but I loved his line, don't be a slave to it. Make sure that you are ready to go be agile, and in all of those lessons, become a greater corporate competitor. But nobody can spell Krzyzewski.